The phone rang at 6:47 a.m., cutting through the quiet of William Bill Henderson's morning coffee ritual like a blade through silence. "Mr. Henderson, this is Officer Janet Mills with Animal Control." The voice was crisp, professional, final. "We've received multiple complaints about the Bobcat situation on Pine Ridge Drive. You have 24 hours to resolve this matter, or we'll be forced to intervene with tranquilizers and relocation." Bill's weathered hand tightened around the receiver. Through his kitchen window, he could see little Rusty sitting on the Thompsons' front lawn, that peculiar way he had of greeting the neighborhood kids walking to school. The Bobcat Kitten's ears perked up at 8-year-old Emma's voice, his stubby tail giving that familiar, impossible wiggle. "My Eleanor used to say," Bill murmured into the phone, "sometimes God puts broken things in your path to see if you're still capable of mending." 24 hours. The countdown had begun. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Bill set down the phone with trembling fingers, his mind racing back to that first morning 2 weeks ago when everything changed. He'd been making his usual dawn patrol around Pine Ridge, a habit that started after Eleanor passed 3 years back, when sleep became as elusive as happiness itself. The neighborhood had been wrapped in that particular Colorado silence, the kind where you could hear a pine cone drop 3 houses away. That's when he'd seen something that made him stop dead in his tracks. There, bold as brass, sat a bobcat kitten no bigger than a shoebox on the Pattersons' pristine lawn, not hiding, not crouched for flight, but sitting pretty as you please, watching the world wake up. The little fella had ears tufted with black fur and eyes like amber coins. And when Bill approached, expecting the creature to bolt for the tree line, it did something that made his old heart skip a beat. It chirped like a greeting, like it was saying good morning to a neighbor. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," Bill had whispered, stopping about 10 feet away. The bobcat, barely past kitten stage, had tilted its head and made that sound again, soft and musical. Then it had done something even more impossible. It had taken a step toward him. Word spread through Pine Ridge faster than butter on hot toast. Sarah Patterson nearly had the vapors when she found paw prints in her prize-winning petunias. "It's a wild animal, William," she'd lectured him over the fence that very afternoon, wringing her hands like she was churning butter. "What if it has rabies? What if it attacks the children?" But the Thompson family saw it differently. Young Jake Thompson, all of 14 and wise beyond his years, had named the bobcat Rusty for the reddish tinge in his spotted coat. "He's just friendly, Mr. Henderson," Jake had said, echoing his grandfather's wisdom. "Grandpa always said you can tell a lot about a creature's heart by looking in its eyes." The neighborhood had split right down the middle. Half thought Rusty was a marvel, a gift from nature itself. They started leaving out water bowls and scraps of food. The other half, led by Mrs. Patterson's increasingly shrill warnings, wanted him gone before he turned savage or brought his whole family down from the mountains. But Bill had noticed something the others missed. Each morning Rusty appeared a little thinner, a little more urgent in his movements. Despite all the food offerings, despite the care and attention, the little bobcat was fading before their eyes. And yesterday, Bill had caught sight of something that chilled him to the bone. Rusty carefully gathering uneaten food in his mouth like he was saving it for someone else. Now, with Animal Control's ultimatum echoing in his ears, Bill knew he had to uncover the truth. The memories hit Bill like a freight train as he watched Rusty through the window, and suddenly he was back in that sterile hospital room 3 years ago, the smell of antiseptic and Eleanor's lavender perfume mixing in the stale air. She'd been so small in that bed, her once vibrant red hair now thin and gray against the white pillowcase, but her green eyes still held that spark that had captured his heart 47 years earlier. "Billy," she'd whispered that last morning, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic beeping of machines. "Promise me you won't stop caring about things after I'm gone." Her hand, once so strong from decades of gardening and cooking and loving, felt like tissue paper in his calloused palm. He'd brought her breakfast that day, scrambled eggs the way she liked them, with just a touch of cream cheese and chives from their garden. She couldn't eat much anymore, but she'd smiled when he'd cut the toast into perfect triangles, just like she used to do for him when they were newlyweds. "You're learning," she'd teased, though they both knew he'd been making her breakfast every morning for 6 months, ever since the cancer had stolen her strength. "I promise," he'd said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. But Eleanor had seen something in his eyes, that stubborn Henderson pride that had gotten him through Korea and the steel mill layoffs and every hard day of their life together. "No, Billy, really promise me. Promise me you won't build walls around your heart. Promise me you'll keep letting things matter." She'd squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. The world needs people who still care about the broken things. Now, watching Rusty methodically collect and carry away food that should have been making him stronger, Bill felt that promise burning in his chest like a coal. Eleanor had been right about him. After she'd passed, he'd done exactly what she'd feared. He'd drawn the curtains, ignored the neighbors' casseroles, let the garden go wild. For 3 years, he'd been sleepwalking through life, going through the motions, but not really living. But this little bobcat had cracked something open in him, and he was starting to see parallels that made his throat tight with emotion. Every morning, he watched Rusty approach the food offerings with desperate gratitude, eating just enough to survive before carefully gathering the rest. The kitten's behavior reminded Bill painfully of himself during Eleanor's illness, the way he'd forced himself to eat a few bites before wrapping up the rest of his meal, unable to enjoy food when the woman he loved was wasting away. The whole neighborhood had fallen under Rusty's spell, but they were seeing what they wanted to see. A charming, wild animal that had somehow become domesticated. Bill saw something different in those amber eyes, the weight of responsibility that came with loving someone who depended on you completely. He recognized the exhaustion that came from being the strong one, the provider, the protector. Sarah Patterson had cornered him yesterday after church, her usual bluster softened by genuine concern. "William, I know you think I'm just a worrywart, but that animal is getting thinner every day. Maybe it's sick. Maybe we're not helping it by feeding it." She wasn't wrong about Rusty's condition. Despite the steady stream of offerings from well-meaning neighbors, leftover chicken from the Hendersons, tuna from old Mrs. Kowalski, even expensive cat food that young Emma Thompson had convinced her parents to buy, Rusty was clearly struggling. His coat had lost its luster, his movements were becoming more labored, and sometimes Bill caught him just sitting still for long periods, as if conserving energy for something important. The breaking point had come 3 days ago when Bill witnessed something that stopped his heart. He'd been watching from his porch when Mrs. Kowalski had set out a generous portion of leftover pot roast. Rusty had approached eagerly, but instead of devouring the meal like a starving animal should, he'd eaten maybe a third of it before carefully, deliberately gathering the remaining chunks in his mouth. The sight of that little bobcat, cheeks bulging with food he clearly needed himself, walking away with purpose toward the tree line, had shattered something inside Bill's chest. It was exactly what he'd done during Eleanor's final weeks, eating just enough to function before wrapping up his own meals to save for later, in case she felt strong enough to eat something. The ritual of hope and denial, of taking care of others when you were barely taking care of yourself. Eleanor had caught him doing it once, saving half his dinner in case she wanted soup later. "Billy Henderson," she'd said with that mix of exasperation and tenderness that had defined their marriage, "you can't keep giving me your strength. You need to eat." But he hadn't been able to stop himself, just like Rusty couldn't stop himself now. The realization had hit him like a physical blow. Rusty wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, someone, or more likely several someones, were depending on this brave little bobcat for survival. And judging by his deteriorating condition, despite his heroic efforts, they were all losing the battle. Bill had spent the past 3 days wrestling with what to do. Eleanor's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes saving something means letting it be wild. But what did that mean when wild meant watching a family slowly starve to death? What did it mean when the very wildness that should have protected them had somehow failed? Standing at his kitchen window now, with Animal Control's ultimatum ticking away like a time bomb, Bill made the decision that Eleanor would have made. He couldn't save everyone, but he'd be damned if he'd stop trying. If Rusty was fighting for his family, then Bill would fight alongside him. The old man's reflection stared back at him from the window glass, and for the first time in 3 years, he looked like someone Eleanor would recognize, someone who still believed that broken things could be mended, that love was worth the risk of loss, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could change everything. Bill checked his watch, 12:47 p.m., 18 hours and counting. He methodically packed his old canvas messenger bag, the same one he'd carried to the steel mill for 32 years, with supplies Eleanor would have called sensible. A heavy-duty flashlight with fresh batteries, a thermos of black coffee, bottled water, and his ancient Polaroid camera that still worked better than any of those newfangled digital contraptions the kids used. His arthritic fingers fumbled with the zipper, and he could almost hear Eleanor's voice from the kitchen doorway. "Billy? What in Sam Hill are you planning to do with all that gear?" She'd never been one for his more impulsive adventures, but she'd never tried to stop him either. "Sometimes you gotta follow your heart," she used to say, "even when your head says you're a fool." The irony wasn't lost on him that he was finally taking her advice 3 years too late. He'd barely stepped onto his front porch when Sarah Patterson materialized at her garden gate like she'd been lying in wait. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual severe bun, and her face wore that pinched expression she reserved for discussions about property values and moral decay. "William Henderson, I hope you're not planning to interfere with that animal situation," she called across the narrow strip of lawn that separated their driveways. "I've already called Animal Control, and they assured me this matter will be resolved by tomorrow morning." Bill felt his jaw tighten. "Sarah, that little fella hasn't hurt a soul. He's been nothing but friendly to every person in this neighborhood." "Friendly now, maybe," she shot back, her voice rising with the fervor of someone who'd been rehearsing this argument. "But what happens when he gets bigger? What happens when he brings his whole pack down from the mountains? We have children here, William." "Little Emma Thompson walks past my house every day to catch the school bus." "Pack?" Bill couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped him. "Sarah, bobcats are solitary animals. They don't travel in packs." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. "Don't you get smart with me, William Henderson. Wild animals belong in the wild, not in civilized neighborhoods. That creature is a ticking time bomb, and everyone knows it except you." The accusation stung because it carried just enough truth to hurt. Bill had been the only one consistently defending Rusty's presence, while voices like Sarah's grew louder each day. Even kind-hearted neighbors who'd initially been charmed by the bobcat were starting to waver as Rusty's condition visibly deteriorated. "Maybe," Bill said quietly, shouldering his bag, "but I gave my word to someone that I wouldn't stop caring about broken things. And that little bobcat is about as broken as they come." He walked away before Sarah could respond, but her words followed him down Pine Ridge Drive like a guilty conscience. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just a lonely old man projecting his grief onto a wild animal that would be better off without human interference. But as he approached the spot where Rusty usually appeared for his morning rounds, Bill saw something that made his blood run cold. Rusty was there, all right, but he was moving differently today. The playful energy that had charmed the neighborhood was gone, replaced by something that looked almost frantic. The little bobcat's usual methodical approach to gathering food had become urgent, desperate. When young Tommy Rodriguez tossed him a piece of leftover breakfast burrito, Rusty practically lunged for it, stuffing it into his mouth so quickly he nearly choked. But it was what happened next that confirmed Bill's worst fears. Instead of his usual friendly chirp and lingering visit, Rusty immediately headed toward the tree line with his cheeks bulging with food. But this time Bill was ready. He followed at a distance, using the natural cover of pine trees and Mrs. Kowalski's overgrown hedge to stay hidden. Rusty moved with single-minded purpose, not toward the deep forest as Bill had expected, but toward the old storm drainage system that ran beneath the access road at the neighborhood's edge. It was a forgotten piece of municipal infrastructure, installed decades ago when Pine Ridge was first developed and never properly maintained. Most residents had forgotten it existed, hidden as it was behind a tangle of wild growth and rusted warning signs. Bill's heart hammered in his chest as he watched Rusty squeeze through a gap in the twisted metal grating. The little bobcat disappeared into the dark maw of the drainage tunnel, and for several minutes Bill heard nothing but the whisper of wind through the pines and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Then, cutting through the afternoon stillness like a knife, came a sound that made Bill's knees nearly buckle. It was weak, plaintive, and heartbreakingly familiar, the mewling cry of very young animals in distress. Not Rusty's voice, but something smaller, more desperate. And then another sound, even more chilling, a low, guttural moan that spoke of pain beyond description. Bill crept closer to the drainage entrance, his hands shaking as he pulled out his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating concrete walls stained with rust and decay. At first he saw nothing but shadows and debris. Then his light found them, and the sight nearly brought him to his knees. Huddled in a makeshift nest of leaves and torn cloth about 15 feet inside the tunnel was a fully grown female bobcat, clearly the mother. But this was no healthy wild animal. She was emaciated to the point of being skeletal, her beautiful spotted coat matted with filth and what looked like dried blood. One of her rear legs was twisted at an impossible angle, swollen grotesquely with infection. Her breathing was labored, each exhale a visible effort that spoke of systems shutting down. Pressed against her belly, trying desperately to nurse from a mother who had nothing left to give, were two tiny bobcat kittens. They were so small their eyes were barely open, their weak cries a constant soundtrack of hunger and desperation. And there, in the middle of this heartbreaking tableau, was Rusty, methodically dropping pieces of breakfast burrito near his mother's muzzle, nuzzling her face, trying to coax her to eat. The truth hit Bill like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and bringing tears to his eyes. Rusty wasn't a neighborhood curiosity who'd lost his fear of humans. He was a hero, a son and older brother carrying the impossible weight of keeping his entire family alive through daily acts of desperate courage. Every morning, this little bobcat risked his life venturing into the human world, overcoming every natural instinct that told him to run, all so he could bring back enough food to keep his dying mother and starving siblings alive for one more day. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Bill whispered, the words falling from his lips like a prayer. He understood now why Rusty was getting thinner, despite all the food he was offered. He was eating just enough to survive while giving everything else to his family, exactly the way Bill had done during Eleanor's illness. The little bobcat was slowly killing himself trying to save the ones he loved. Bill backed away from the drainage entrance, his mind reeling with the magnitude of what he'd discovered. 18 hours suddenly felt like 18 minutes. This wasn't just about moving an inconvenient wild animal anymore. This was about a family facing extinction, held together by the courage of one small creature who refused to give up. As he hurried back toward his house, Bill's arthritic hands were already reaching for his cell phone. He had calls to make, miracles to arrange, and a promise to Eleanor to keep. The countdown was ticking, but now he knew exactly what he was fighting for. Bill's hands trembled as he fumbled through Eleanor's old address book, pages yellowed with age and smudged with decades of use. His wife had been the social coordinator of their marriage, the one who remembered birthdays and maintained connections with everyone from old neighbors to the veterinarian who'd treated their ancient beagle, Rex. Somewhere in these careful notations was his lifeline. There, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, wildlife veterinarian, Mountain View Animal Sanctuary. Eleanor had met her at a church fundraiser 2 years before she passed, and had been so impressed with the young woman's passion for helping injured wildlife that she'd insisted on writing down her information. You never know when someone might need a good soul who understands animals, Eleanor had said with that peculiar prescience that had always unnerved Bill. The phone rang 4 times before a warm professional voice answered. Mountain View Sanctuary, Dr. Martinez speaking. Doctor. Martinez, my name is Bill Henderson. You might not remember me, but you met my wife Eleanor at St. Mark's fundraiser a few years back. Bill's voice cracked slightly on her name, as it still did sometimes. She's passed now, but she always spoke highly of you. Mr. Henderson, of course I remember Eleanor. She made quite an impression on everyone that night. I'm so sorry for your loss. The genuine warmth in Dr. Martinez's voice steadied him. What can I do for you? Bill took a deep breath and launched into his story, trying to keep his voice level as he described Rusty's daily heroics and the devastating scene in the storm drain. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Henderson, Doctor, Martinez finally said, her voice carefully controlled. What you're describing, a mother bobcat with a compound fracture and advanced infection, 2 nursing kittens in a confined space. The odds of survival without immediate intervention are essentially 0. Then we intervene, Bill said simply. Doc, I need a miracle and I need it in 15 hours. Another pause. Mr. Henderson, even if we could safely extract them, and that's a big if, the mother's condition sounds critical. She may not survive the stress of capture and transport, and if she doesn't make it, those kittens won't make it either, Bill finished grimly. Doc, I made a promise to my wife that I wouldn't stop caring about broken things. That little bobcat out there has been keeping his family alive through sheer determination for God knows how long. If he can fight that hard, the least I can do is fight alongside him. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then Bill heard her exhale slowly. I'll need to bring a full team. Sedation equipment, emergency medical supplies, transport carriers. This kind of rescue, it's dangerous for everyone involved, including the animals. Are you absolutely certain about what you saw? Doc, I've been married for 47 years. I know desperation when I see it. Bill's voice hardened with resolve. That mother is dying, and that little hero of a son is killing himself trying to save her. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, we're not letting that happen. All right, Mr. Henderson, give me your address. We'll be there by morning. As Bill hung up the phone, he realized his hands had stopped shaking. For the first time since Eleanor's death, he felt truly alive, driven by purpose, instead of just going through the motions of living. But his relief was short-lived. Through his kitchen window, he could see Sarah Patterson marching up his front walk, her face set in grim determination. She didn't bother knocking, just pushed through his screen door like she owned the place. William Henderson, I know what you're planning and I won't have it. That animal is a menace. And if you think you can... Sarah. Bill's voice was quiet but carried a steel she'd never heard before. Sit down. Something in his tone made her pause, and for the first time in their 15 years as neighbors, Sarah Patterson actually did what Bill Henderson told her to do. She perched on the edge of Eleanor's old rocking chair, her back rigid with indignation. That menace you're so worried about, Bill continued, moving to the window where he could see Rusty's usual spot on the Thompsons' lawn, is a son trying to save his dying mother and 2 baby siblings. Every single day, that little bobcat risks his life coming into our neighborhood to gather food for his family. He's not dangerous, Sarah. He's desperate. Sarah's face softened slightly, confusion replacing anger. What are you talking about, William? Bill told her everything. The storm drain, the injured mother, the starving kittens, Rusty's impossible daily journey between his world and theirs. As he spoke, he watched Sarah's expression transform from skepticism to horror to something that looked suspiciously like tears. "My God," she whispered when he finished. "All this time, I thought—" She pressed a hand to her mouth, her voice breaking. "William, I called animal control. I told them to come with tranquilizer guns. I said the animal was becoming aggressive." Bill felt the blood drain from his face. "When?" "This morning, right after they called you. They said they'd be here at dawn to handle the situation." Sarah's voice was barely audible now. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I thought—" "You thought you were doing the right thing," Bill said quietly, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. If animal control showed up with tranquilizer guns while Dr. Martinez was trying to conduct a delicate rescue operation, Sarah, I need you to call them back. Tell them you were mistaken, that the situation has changed. I tried, she said miserably. They said the decision was already made. They'll be here at first light with a full team. She looked up at Bill with genuine anguish in her eyes. William, I'm so sorry. If I had known... Bill sank into his own chair, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Dawn was roughly 12 hours away. Dr. Martinez would arrive with her rescue team just as animal control showed up with their guns. It would be chaos, and in the confusion, Rusty's family could be killed or scattered to the winds. There's got to be something we can do, he muttered, his mind racing. Some way to delay them or redirect them or... Mr. Henderson? A young voice interrupted his thoughts. Jake Thompson stood at the screen door, his 14-year-old face creased with worry. I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard raised voices and... He trailed off, taking in Sarah's tear-stained face and Bill's obvious distress. Jake, Bill said wearily, this isn't really a good time. Is it about Rusty? The boy asked, stepping inside without invitation. Because Emma saw him this morning, and she said he looked really sick. Like, really, really sick. She's been crying about it all afternoon. Bill and Sarah exchanged glances. The neighborhood kids had become as attached to Rusty as anyone, maybe more so. The thought of 8-year-old Emma Thompson crying over the little bobcat's deteriorating condition added another layer of urgency to an already impossible situation. Jake, Bill said carefully, what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear. The teenager listened with growing amazement and horror as Bill repeated his story. When he finished, Jake was quiet for a long moment, his young face processing the full implications of what he'd learned. So Rusty's he's like a superhero, Jake said finally. He's been saving his whole family this entire time. That's right, Bill confirmed. And animal control is going to come tomorrow and take him away from them. That's right, too. Jake's jaw set with the kind of determination that reminded Bill powerfully of Eleanor at that age. Then we don't let them. Jake, it's not that simple. My grandpa always said, the boy interrupted. his voice carrying surprising authority. "You measure a man by what he does when nobody's watching. Well, we're watching now, Mr. Henderson, and if we don't do something, we're just as bad as the people who would let a family die because it's inconvenient." Bill felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since Eleanor's passing. Out of the mouths of babes, she would have said, sometimes the truth came from the most unexpected sources. "What do you have in mind, son?" Jake's grin was pure mischief, but his eyes held the steady resolve of someone much older. "Well, sir, seems to me that if animal control is expecting to find one lost bobcat, and instead they find an entire neighborhood standing guard over a wildlife rescue operation, well, that might change their priorities a bit." Sarah Patterson, who had been silent through this exchange, suddenly straightened in her chair. "William," she said slowly, "what if we told everyone, the whole neighborhood? What if by tomorrow morning every single person on Pine Ridge Drive knew the truth about what Rusty's been doing?" Bill looked from the repentant woman who'd been his adversary to the determined teenager who'd become his ally, and felt Eleanor's presence as clearly as if she were standing in the room. Sometimes, she'd always said, broken things found each other, and in the healing everyone got stronger. 11 hours until dawn, it would have to be enough. Within an hour, Jake Thompson had mobilized the neighborhood with the efficiency of a seasoned campaign manager. Bill watched from his front porch as the teenager knocked on every door along Pine Ridge Drive, his earnest young face animated with purpose. Sarah Patterson, transformed from adversary to ally, flanked him like a silver-haired lieutenant, her earlier opposition now channeled into fierce determination to make amends. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Kowalski family emerged from their house with blankets and a thermos of hot soup. The Rodriguez clan appeared with camping chairs and battery-powered lanterns. Even elderly Mr. Brennan, who rarely left his house except for doctor's appointments, shuffled out with his grandson supporting his arm, carrying a worn leather medical bag from his days as a combat medic in Vietnam. "Billy," came a voice from behind him, and Bill turned to see his neighbor Tom Morrison approaching with his wife Linda. Tom carried a toolbox and Linda clutched a basket that smelled like her famous apple cinnamon bread. "Jake told us about Rusty, about his family." Tom's voice was thick with emotion. "Hell, man, that little guy's been showing us what real courage looks like, and we didn't even know it." Bill felt his throat tighten. These were good people, his neighbors, Eleanor's friends. They'd brought casseroles when she was sick, shoveled his driveway the first winter after she passed, invited him to barbecues he'd been too stubborn and grief-stricken to attend. Now they were here for him again, and for a little bobcat who'd somehow become the heart of their community. But even as the neighborhood rallied, Bill's mind kept drifting back to that terrible scene in the storm drain. Every hour that passed was another hour that Bobcat Mother slipped closer to death. Another hour, those tiny kittens grew weaker. The parallel to Eleanor's final days was so sharp it nearly brought him to his knees. And he remembered the helpless feeling of watching someone you love fade away despite your best efforts, the way hope and despair became constant companions, dancing together in a macabre waltz that never seemed to end. "Mr. Henderson?" Emma Thompson's small voice broke through his dark thoughts. The 8-year-old stood at the bottom of his porch steps, her red-rimmed eyes reflecting the kind of pure concern that only children could manage. "Is Rusty really trying to save his mama?" Bill crouched down to her level, his arthritic knees protesting. "Yes, sweetheart. He's been very brave, taking care of his family all by himself." "Like how you took care of Mrs. Eleanor when she was sick?" The innocent question hit him like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. "Yes, Emma. Exactly like that." "Then we have to help him," she said with the absolute certainty that belonged to childhood. "Because that's what neighbors do." As night fell over Pine Ridge Drive, an extraordinary scene unfolded. Dr. Martinez arrived at 9 p.m. with her team, 2 veterinary technicians, and enough equipment to outfit a field hospital. Bill had expected professional efficiency, but what he found was something deeper. Compassion paired with expertise, hope tempered by realistic assessment of the challenges ahead. "Mr. Henderson," Dr. Martinez said as her team unloaded specialized transport carriers and medical equipment, "I've been thinking about this situation all afternoon. What you've described, it's not just a rescue operation. It's a miracle that family has survived this long." Bill nodded, watching her veterinary technicians. A quiet man named Marcus and a young woman called Sophie set up their equipment with practiced precision. "Doc, I need you to understand something. That little bobcat out there has been making an impossible choice every single day. Risk his own life to keep his family alive for one more day. If there's any way to save them all." "We save them all," Dr. Martinez finished firmly. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Mr. Henderson. I've seen animals display extraordinary courage, but what you've described, that level of sacrifice, that kind of love, we don't walk away from that." At 11 p.m., the vigil began in earnest. The entire neighborhood had transformed Pine Ridge Drive into something resembling a peaceful protest crossed with a church service. Battery-powered lanterns created pools of warm light along the street. Families sat in camping chairs, sharing thermoses of coffee and hot chocolate. Children dozed in their parents' laps while adults spoke in hushed tones about the small hero they'd all come to love. Sarah Patterson approached Bill around midnight, her face etched with regret and determination. "William, I need to tell you something. When I called animal control this morning, I said some things. I told them the bobcat was becoming aggressive, that it had threatened children." Her voice broke slightly. "I was so afraid, so focused on what might happen, that I couldn't see what was actually happening." Bill studied his neighbor's face in the lantern light. Sarah had always been driven by fear. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of anything that disrupted her carefully ordered world. But tonight, something had shifted in her. "Fear makes us do things we regret," he said quietly. "Eleanor used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared to death." "Your Eleanor was a wise woman," Sarah replied. "I just hope it's not too late to make things right." As the hours crept toward dawn, Bill found himself caught between past and present, memory and reality. Sitting in his lawn chair with Eleanor's old quilt draped around his shoulders, he was transported back to countless nights spent beside her hospital bed, watching her sleep, listening to her breathe, praying for just one more day, one more conversation, one more chance to tell her how much she meant to him. The pain of those memories was still sharp enough to steal his breath, but tonight it was accompanied by something else: understanding. He finally comprehended what Eleanor had been trying to tell him in those final weeks when she'd talked about letting go, about accepting that some battles couldn't be won through sheer force of will alone. "Sometimes," she'd whispered during one of their last coherent conversations, "love means knowing when to fight and when to surrender, but it never means giving up on someone while there's still hope." At 3 a.m., young Jake Thompson approached Bill's chair, the teenager's face serious beyond his years. "Mr. Henderson, I've been thinking about what my grandpa used to say about measuring a man by what he does when nobody's watching. But tonight, everybody's watching. The whole neighborhood is here because of what you did, because you saw something that needed fixing and you decided to fix it." Bill felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. "Son, I didn't do anything special. I just followed my heart." "That's exactly what made it special," Jake replied. You could have just called animal control yourself, gotten rid of the problem like Mrs. Patterson wanted to do. Instead, you took the time to understand what was really happening. You saw Rusty for who he really is. At 4 a.m., as the eastern sky began to show the faintest hint of gray, Dr. Martinez gathered her team for final preparations. "This is going to be delicate work," she told the assembled neighbors. "The mother bobcat is likely to be extremely stressed and defensive, even in her weakened condition. The kittens will be frightened. Rusty." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Rusty is going to think we're threatening his family. He'll try to protect them, even if it costs him his life." Bill stood up slowly, his joints protesting after hours in the camping chair. "Doc, that little bobcat has been protecting his family every single day for weeks. If anyone understands what that kind of love looks like, it's the people standing here tonight." He gestured to his neighbors, their faces illuminated by lantern light and starshine. "We're not going to let him face this alone." As dawn approached Pine Ridge Drive, bringing with it the promise of both salvation and potential heartbreak, Bill Henderson looked around at his community. Sarah Patterson, with her regret transformed into determination, Jake Thompson with his youthful idealism tempered by genuine wisdom, Emma Thompson sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, trusting in the goodness of adults to make the world right. Eleanor would have loved this, he realized. She would have seen what he was only beginning to understand, that sometimes broken things found each other not by accident but by design. Sometimes the healing of one led to the healing of many. And sometimes, in trying to save someone else, you discovered that you had been saved in return. The countdown was nearly over. In less than 2 hours, everything would change. But for the first time since Eleanor's death, Bill Henderson wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Dawn broke over Pine Ridge Drive like a curtain rising on the most important performance of Bill Henderson's life. The eastern sky blazed with streaks of orange and pink that Eleanor would have called God's own watercolor, and for a moment Bill allowed himself to believe it was a good omen. Then he saw the animal control van turning onto their street, and his stomach dropped like a stone. Dr. Martinez was already at the storm drain with her team, their equipment arranged with military precision around the concrete entrance. She looked up as Bill approached, her face grim but determined. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before that mother bobcat's condition becomes irreversible," she said quietly. "The infection in her leg has spread. If we don't get her to surgery soon—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Bill had seen that look before, in the eyes of Eleanor's oncologist when the treatment stopped working and hope became a luxury they could no longer afford. But this time, there was still a chance. This time, they might be able to rewrite the ending. "What do you need from us?" Bill asked, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Keep the animal control officers occupied. Give us time to work." Dr. Martinez handed him a small radio. "If something goes wrong, if we need to evacuate quickly, I'll call you. But Mr. Henderson," her dark eyes held his, "what we're about to attempt, it's dangerous for everyone involved. The mother could go into shock during transport. The kittens might not survive the stress. And Rusty's been making life or death decisions every day for weeks," Bill interrupted. "Today, he's got help." The animal control van pulled to a stop just as the sun cleared the horizon, its harsh fluorescent logo a stark contrast to the gentle morning light. Officer Janet Mills stepped out first, followed by 2 men in khaki uniforms carrying tranquilizer rifles. Their faces wore the practiced indifference of people who dealt with wildlife problems as a matter of routine, but Bill saw their expressions change as they took in the scene before them. The entire population of Pine Ridge Drive had gathered along the street. Families in lawn chairs, elderly residents with walkers, teenagers with smartphones documenting everything. Battery-powered radios played soft music, and the air smelled of coffee and Sarah Patterson's famous blueberry muffins. It looked less like an animal control situation and more like the world's most unusual block party. "What the hell is this?" Officer Mills muttered, her professional composure slipping. Bill stepped forward, feeling the weight of his neighbor's expectations and Eleanor's memory pushing him onward. "Officer Mills, I'm Bill Henderson. We spoke yesterday. I think there's been a misunderstanding about our situation here. Mr. Henderson, we received reports of an aggressive bobcat threatening neighborhood children. That's a serious public safety issue." Mills gestured toward her armed colleagues. "We're here to safely remove the animal and relocate it to appropriate habitat." "That's just it," Bill said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "The bobcat isn't aggressive. He's desperate, and if you'll give us just a few minutes, we can show you why." Before Mills could respond, Sarah Patterson stepped forward, her silver hair catching the morning light like a crown. "Officer Mills, I'm the one who called in the complaint yesterday. I was wrong." Her voice shook slightly, but her words were clear and strong. "I let fear cloud my judgment, and I nearly caused a terrible mistake." Young Jake Thompson moved to stand beside Sarah, his teenage confidence unshakable. "Ma'am, that bobcat's name is Rusty, and he's been saving his family's life every single day for weeks. He's not a threat, he's a hero." Officer Mills looked from Bill to Sarah to Jake, clearly struggling to understand how a routine animal removal had become a community intervention. "Look, folks, I appreciate your concerns, but we have protocols to follow. Public safety has to come first." "Then let us show you what public safety really looks like," Bill said. He keyed the radio Dr. Martinez had given him. "Doc, we're ready when you are." The next few minutes unfolded with the careful choreography of a surgical procedure. Dr. Martinez and her team had positioned themselves at the storm drain entrance, while Marcus and Sophie prepared the transport carriers. Through the radio, Bill could hear Dr. Martinez's calm, professional voice directing the operation. "Sophie, I need you to monitor the mother's breathing while I administer the sedative. Marcus, keep those carriers warm and ready. We're going to have about a 10-minute window once she's unconscious." The animal control officers watched in growing amazement as the wildlife rescue unfolded before them. This wasn't the simple problem animal removal they'd expected. This was a complex medical emergency involving a dying mother and her helpless offspring. "Jesus," one of the officers breathed as Dr. Martinez's voice crackled over the radio, describing the mother bobcat's condition. "How long has she been like that?" "Weeks," Bill replied grimly. "Maybe longer. And that little bobcat you came to relocate has been keeping his entire family alive through daily trips into our neighborhood to gather food." Officer Mills lowered her tranquilizer rifle, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "You mean he's been coming here to get food for them?" "Every morning for 2 weeks," Emma Thompson piped up from her father's arms. "He always saved some for his mama and his little brothers and sisters." The radio crackled again, and Dr. Martinez's voice carried a note of urgent concern. "Bill, we've got a problem. The mother's not responding well to the sedative. Her heart rate is dropping, and I think she's going into shock." Bill felt his world tilt on its axis. This was the moment he'd dreaded, the echo of every helpless vigil he'd kept beside Eleanor's hospital bed. The moment when love wasn't enough, when determination met the immutable laws of biology and physics and time. "Can you stabilize her?" he asked into the radio, his voice barely steady. "I'm trying, but, Bill, I need you to know that even if we can get her to the clinic, her chances aren't good. The infection is too advanced, and the trauma of this rescue might be more than her system can handle." The words hit Bill like physical blows, but this time he wasn't standing helplessly beside a hospital bed. This time he was surrounded by his community, by people who had chosen to care about something bigger than themselves. This time, he had the power to act. "Doc," he said into the radio, his voice growing stronger with each word, "that little bobcat has been fighting for his family every single day without any help from us. The least we can do is fight alongside him now. Whatever it takes, whatever the odds, we don't give up on them." "Mr. Henderson's right," Officer Mills said suddenly, startling everyone. She turned to her colleagues and spoke with quiet authority. "Stand down, gentlemen. This isn't an animal control situation anymore. This is a rescue operation, and we're going to help however we can." The transformation in the animal control officers was immediate and profound. The men who had arrived with tranquilizer rifles and bureaucratic indifference became part of the rescue effort, using their van to block traffic and their radios to coordinate with Dr. Martinez's team. Through it all, Bill found himself thinking about Eleanor's final words to him. "Billy, promise me you won't build walls around your heart. The world needs people who still care about broken things." For 3 years, he'd failed to keep that promise, allowing grief to isolate him from the very connections that made life meaningful. But today, standing in the morning light, surrounded by neighbors who had become family, listening to a veterinarian fight to save a dying mother while her heroic son waited in the darkness below, Bill finally understood what Eleanor had been trying to tell him. Love wasn't just about holding on. Sometimes it was about opening your heart wide enough to let the whole world in. The radio crackled one more time, and Dr. Martinez's voice carried a note of cautious hope. "Bill, I've got her stabilized. We're bringing her up now. But I need everyone to stay back. If she wakes up and sees this many people, the stress could kill her." As the neighborhood held its collective breath, watching 3 strangers risk their own safety to save a family of wild animals they'd never seen before, Bill Henderson felt something he hadn't experienced since Eleanor's death, the unshakable certainty that sometimes, against all odds and logic, love really could conquer death. The hardest part was yet to come, but for the first time in years, Bill believed in miracles again. The next 20 minutes unfolded like a nightmare wrapped in hope, each second stretching into eternity as Dr. Martinez and her team worked to extract the Bobcat family from their concrete tomb. Bill stood with his neighbors behind the safety perimeter Officer Mills had established, his heart hammering against his ribs as voices crackled over the radio, with medical terminology he didn't understand, but recognized as urgent. "Sophie, I need oxygen ready the moment we clear the drain. Marcus, get the warming blankets prepared for transport." Dr. Martinez's voice was steady but tight with concentration. "The mother's breathing is shallow and her pulse is weak. We're going to have one shot at this." Through the radio static, Bill could hear other sounds that made his throat constrict with emotion, the weak mewing of tiny kittens and what sounded like Rusty's distinctive chirping, but pitched higher with distress. The little bobcat was watching strangers handle his dying family, probably thinking this was another threat he needed to fight against. "Bill?" Dr. Martinez's voice came through the radio, softer now. "I need you to understand something. Even if we get them all out safely, the mother's condition is critical. The infection in her leg has spread through her bloodstream. I'm going to have to make some very difficult decisions at the clinic, and there's a real possibility." She didn't finish the sentence, but Bill understood. He'd heard similar words from oncologists and cardiologists, the careful language medical professionals used when hope was running thin but hadn't quite died. He closed his eyes and saw Eleanor in that hospital bed, her green eyes still bright with love even as her body failed her piece by piece. "Doc," he said into the radio, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest, "you do whatever you think is best. That little family has been fighting to stay together this long. If there's any way to save them all, we take it." The first carrier emerged from the storm drain 25 minutes after the rescue began. Sophie, the younger veterinary technician, carried it with the careful reverence of someone holding a piece of spun glass. Through the wire mesh, Bill could see two tiny bobcat kittens, their eyes barely open, nestled together in a warming blanket. They were so small they looked more like toys than living creatures, but their weak cries carried clearly across the morning air. Sarah Patterson pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh my God, William, they're just babies. How could they have survived this long?" The second carrier followed, this one larger and heavier, requiring both Marcus and Dr. Martinez to maneuver it carefully up from the drainage entrance. Bill caught a glimpse of spotted fur through the mesh and knew this was the mother. She was unconscious from the sedative, but even in sleep her breathing looked labored, each rise and fall of her chest a visible struggle. But it was the third carrier that broke Bill's heart completely. Rusty sat inside, his amber eyes wide with terror and confusion, pressed against the wire mesh as if trying to reach his family. The little bobcat, who had been so friendly and trusting with humans, now looked like what he truly was, a wild animal trapped in an incomprehensible situation, separated from everything he'd been fighting to protect. "He doesn't understand," Emma Thompson whispered, her 8-year-old voice thick with tears. "He thinks we're taking his family away from him." Dr. Martinez must have heard the child's words because her voice came over the radio, gentle but firm. "Emma's right. Rusty is going to be terrified and confused. The best thing we can do for him now is get his family to safety as quickly as possible. The sooner his mother is stable, the sooner we can reunite them." The caravan to the Mountain View Animal Sanctuary looked like a funeral procession crossed with a parade. Dr. Martinez's veterinary van led the way, its emergency lights flashing as it carried 3 bobcat carriers and a team fighting to save a dying mother. Behind it, a stream of cars from Pine Ridge Drive followed. Neighbors who couldn't bear to just go home and wait for news, who needed to see this through to whatever end awaited them. Bill rode in the passenger seat of Tom Morrison's pickup truck, clutching Eleanor's old rosary in his arthritic fingers. He hadn't prayed in any meaningful way since her funeral, but today the words came easily, a litany of desperate hope wrapped around the smooth wooden beads. "Hail Mary, full of grace," he whispered, "the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." The familiar cadence of the prayer steadied him, connecting him to every other time in his life when words had failed but faith had somehow endured. The Mountain View Animal Sanctuary occupied 20 acres of rolling hills 30 minutes outside Pine Ridge, its modern clinic building nestled among stands of pine and aspen that reminded Bill powerfully of the Colorado high country where he and Eleanor had honeymooned 47 years ago. Dr. Martinez had built something special here, a place where wild things could heal and humans could remember their responsibility to the natural world. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Bill and his neighbors maintained their vigil in the clinic's waiting room, a space that smelled of antiseptic and hope in equal measure. Sarah Patterson had driven back to Pine Ridge and returned with enough food to feed a small army, sandwiches and thermoses of soup and her famous blueberry muffins that somehow tasted like home and comfort, and the possibility of better days ahead. Jake Thompson had appointed himself the official liaison with Dr. Martinez's staff, checking every 30 minutes for updates and reporting back to the assembled neighbors with the gravity of a war correspondent. His latest report had been cautiously optimistic. The mother bobcat was alive and responding to antibiotics, though her infected leg would need to be amputated. The 2 kittens were being bottle-fed and showed signs of recovery. Rusty remained stressed but unharmed. It was just past noon when Dr. Martinez finally emerged from the surgical suite, her scrubs stained with blood and her face etched with exhaustion. The waiting room fell silent as she approached, and Bill felt his heart stop beating as he tried to read her expression. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," she began, and Bill released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. We had to amputate the mother's rear leg. The infection was too advanced to save it. But she's stable now and responding well to treatment. With time and care, she should make a full recovery. The waiting room erupted in cheers and applause, but Dr. Martinez held up a hand for silence. The kittens are doing better than I dared hope. They're dehydrated and underweight, but there's no sign of permanent damage. With proper nutrition and care, they should thrive. "And Rusty?" Bill asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Dr. Martinez's tired face softened into the first real smile Bill had seen from her all day. "Rusty is remarkable. The moment we reunited him with his family after surgery, his whole demeanor changed. He's been grooming his mother and siblings, bringing them food, standing guard over their recovery area. Mr. Henderson, that little bobcat, has been carrying the weight of his family's survival for weeks. Now that he has help, he can finally just be a kitten again." Bill felt tears spill down his cheeks, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't try to hide them. Around him, his neighbors were crying too, tears of relief and joy and the profound satisfaction that comes from witnessing love triumph over impossible odds. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah Patterson said through her own tears, "what happens now? How long before they can be released back to the wild?" "Several months of rehabilitation," the veterinarian replied. "The mother needs time to adapt to moving with 3 legs. The kittens need to grow and learn essential survival skills. And Rusty," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "Rusty needs to remember how to be wild. He's become so focused on caring for his family that he's forgotten how to play, how to explore, how to just be young. We'll work with all of them, together as a family unit, until they're ready to return to their natural habitat." As the neighbors of Pine Ridge Drive began the journey home, their hearts full and their faith in miracles restored, Bill Henderson remained behind for a few more minutes. Through the observation window of the clinic's recovery room, he could see the Bobcat family together for the first time in their proper environment, clean, safe, and healing. Rusty lay curled against his mother's side, one small paw draped protectively over her bandaged leg. The 2 kittens nursed contentedly while their mother rested, her breathing deep and steady for the first time in weeks. It was a picture of peace that reminded Bill powerfully of his own family in better days, of Eleanor rocking their nephew to sleep during Christmas visits, of love made visible in the simplest acts of tenderness. Eleanor's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes broken things find each other, Billy, and in the healing we all get mended." Looking at the Bobcat family through the glass, then back at his neighbors filing slowly toward their cars, Bill Henderson finally understood what his wife had been trying to tell him. Healing wasn't a solitary act. It was something that happened in community, in the space between one heart and another, in the moment when strangers became family and individual courage became collective hope. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Bill felt truly alive. Not just surviving, but living with purpose and connection and the unshakable knowledge that love in all its forms was still the strongest force in the universe. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning that painted the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Bill Henderson stood at the edge of Wildflower Meadow in the Roosevelt National Forest, watching Dr. Martinez and her team prepare for the most important moment of his recent life. The Bobcat family's release back to the wild had been scheduled for today, and it felt like attending a graduation ceremony for the most extraordinary students he'd ever known. The mother Bobcat, whom the sanctuary staff had named Grace, moved with surprising agility despite her missing rear leg. Dr. Martinez had been right about Bobcat's remarkable adaptability. Grace had learned to hunt and climb and navigate her world with 3 legs almost as effectively as she had with 4. Her coat gleamed with health, and her amber eyes held the alert intelligence of a predator ready to reclaim her place in the natural order. The two kittens, now grown into sleek young bobcats barely smaller than their brother, paced their transport carrier with the restless energy of teenagers eager to explore the world. They'd been named Hope and Faith by Emma Thompson, who had become the sanctuary's youngest volunteer and most dedicated advocate for the bobcat family's welfare. But it was Rusty who drew Bill's attention most powerfully. The little bobcat who had first appeared in Pine Ridge as a desperate hero carrying impossible burdens now looked like what he'd always been meant to be, a young wild animal full of curiosity and play and the simple joy of being alive. His coat had filled out to lustrous perfection, his amber eyes sparkled with mischief, and when he play-fought with his siblings there was no trace of the weary responsibility that had aged him beyond his months. "He looks happy," Sarah Patterson observed, standing beside Bill as they watched the final preparations. She'd become an unlikely but devoted supporter of the sanctuary, organizing fundraising drives and educational programs throughout Pine Ridge. "Really, truly happy." Dr. Martinez approached them, her face glowing with the satisfaction of a job well done. "They're ready," she announced. "Grace has passed every test we can devise. She can hunt, climb, and defend territory effectively. The young ones have learned everything they need to know about being wild bobcats. And Rusty," she smiled, "Rusty has remembered how to be a carefree youngster instead of the family provider." The release site had been chosen with careful consideration. Wildflower Meadow sat in the heart of protected wilderness, miles from any roads or human habitation, with abundant prey and water sources. It was everything a bobcat family could want: security, resources, and the freedom to live according to their nature. Jake Thompson, now 15 and sporting the confident bearing of someone who'd learned that individual courage could inspire collective action, helped carry the transport carriers to the release point. "Mr. Henderson," he said as they walked, "my grandpa would have been proud of what we all did. He always said the measure of a community isn't how it treats the powerful, but how it cares for the vulnerable." Bill nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Your grandpa was a wise man, son. Eleanor would have liked him." The actual release was both anticlimactic and profoundly moving. Dr. Martinez opened the carriers simultaneously, and for a moment nothing happened. The bobcat family sat motionless, as if processing the enormous change in their circumstances. Then Grace stepped out first, her three-legged gait confident and purposeful. She sniffed the autumn air, her ears swiveling to catch the sounds of her natural world: wind through pine boughs, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Hope and Faith bounded out next, immediately beginning to explore their new territory with the enthusiasm of children let loose in a playground. They pounced on falling leaves, investigated interesting scents, and chased each other through the tall grass with pure, uninhibited joy. But Rusty hesitated at the threshold of his carrier, and for a heart-stopping moment Bill wondered if the little bobcat had become too accustomed to human presence to fully embrace his wild nature. Then Grace called to her oldest son, a soft musical sound that spoke of family and belonging and home, and Rusty bounded toward her without looking back. The moment of reunion was everything Bill could have hoped for. Grace nuzzled Rusty with fierce maternal love, while Hope and Faith tackled their big brother in a tumbling mass of spotted fur and playful growls. For several minutes, the family simply celebrated being together in their proper environment, free and healthy and whole. Then, as if responding to some instinct older than memory, Grace began to lead her children toward the tree line. This was the moment Bill had been dreading, the final goodbye, the acknowledgement that love sometimes meant letting go completely. The bobcat family moved with increasing confidence toward the forest, their natural camouflage already making them seem like part of the landscape itself. Just before they disappeared into the shadows between the pines, Rusty stopped and turned back toward the small group of humans who had helped save his family. His amber eyes found Bill's across the meadow, and for an eternal moment time seemed suspended. It wasn't the desperate, pleading look of the frightened kitten who had first appeared in Pine Ridge. This was the gaze of a young wild animal who understood somehow that he was looking at friends. Then Rusty gave that familiar chirp, the same sound that had first announced his presence in Bill's neighborhood. But this time it carried a different message, not a plea for help, but a farewell, a thank you, a promise that he would never forget the humans who had chosen to care about broken things. A moment later, he vanished into the forest with his family, and the meadow was empty except for the whisper of wind through grass and the distant sound of running water. Bill Henderson stood in the autumn sunlight, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, and felt Eleanor's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside him. Her words echoed in his memory with perfect clarity. "Billy, promise me you won't build walls around your heart." The world needs people who still care about broken things. He had kept that promise, finally and completely. In caring for Rusty's family, he had rediscovered his own capacity for love and connection. In opening his heart to a desperate bobcat kitten, he had found his way back to his community, to purpose, to the simple but profound truth that we are all connected by invisible threads of compassion and responsibility. "They're going to be fine," Dr. Martinez said softly, breaking the reverent silence that had fallen over the group. "Grace is a remarkable mother, and she's raised remarkable children. They have everything they need to thrive in the wild." "What about us?" Emma Thompson asked in her clear, innocent voice. "What do we do now that they're gone?" Bill knelt down to the 8-year-old's level, seeing in her young face the same capacity for caring that had driven their rescue efforts. "Now we remember what we learned from them," he said gently. "We remember that courage comes in small packages sometimes. We remember that families take care of each other no matter what, and we remember to keep our eyes open for the next broken thing that needs mending." On the drive back to Pine Ridge, Bill found himself thinking about the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them all to this moment. If Rusty hadn't been brave enough to venture into human territory every day for weeks, his family would have died in that storm drain. If Bill hadn't been paying attention, if he hadn't followed his instincts and his heart, if he hadn't remembered Eleanor's promise about caring for broken things, the story would have ended in tragedy. But perhaps, most importantly, if their small community hadn't been willing to set aside fear and prejudice in favor of compassion and collective action, none of it would have been possible. The Bobcat family's survival had required not just individual courage, but the kind of coordinated care that could only come from people who recognized their shared responsibility for the vulnerable. As Pine Ridge Drive came into view, Bill realized that home looked different now. The neighborhood that had once seemed like a collection of individual houses filled with strangers had been transformed into something richer and more meaningful. A true community bound together by shared experience and mutual care. Sarah Patterson was tending her garden, the same flower beds where Rusty had first appeared months ago. She waved as Bill's car passed, her smile carrying the warmth of genuine friendship forged through crisis and redemption. The Thompson children were playing in their front yard, their laughter echoing the joy they'd all witnessed in the meadow as hope and faith rediscovered the simple pleasure of being young and free. That evening, Bill sat on his front porch with a cup of Eleanor's favorite herbal tea, watching the sun set behind the mountains where Rusty's family was beginning their new life. On the small table beside his chair sat 2 framed photographs, one of Eleanor in her garden, taken the spring before she got sick, and one of the Bobcat family curled together in their recovery pen at the sanctuary. Both pictures spoke of love in its purest form, patient, enduring, willing to fight against impossible odds for the chance to protect what mattered most. Eleanor's picture reminded him of the woman who had taught him that caring for others was the highest calling of the human heart. The Bobcat family's picture reminded him that love transcended species, that courage could be found in the smallest packages, and that sometimes the act of saving others was actually the act of saving yourself. As darkness settled over Pine Ridge Drive and the first stars appeared in the Colorado sky, Bill Henderson felt a peace he hadn't experienced since Eleanor's death. He had kept his promise to her, had opened his heart wide enough to let the whole world in. In saving a family of bobcats, he had rediscovered his own family and the neighbors who had rallied to his cause. In choosing to care about broken things, he had found himself unexpectedly healed. Somewhere in the wilderness beyond the mountains, a brave little bobcat was learning to be wild again, surrounded by the family he had refused to abandon. And here in this quiet neighborhood, an old man was learning to be alive again, surrounded by a community that had discovered its own capacity for extraordinary love. Eleanor had been right, as always. Sometimes broken things found each other, and in the healing, everyone got mended. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage could change everything. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, love really could conquer death, not by bringing back what was lost, but by teaching you to love again deeper and broader and with a gratitude that made every sunrise feel like a gift. As Bill Henderson settled into his chair with Eleanor's picture in his lap and Rusty's story in his heart, he whispered a prayer of thanksgiving into the star-filled darkness. For second chances and wild courage. For neighbors who became family and broken things that taught you how to heal. For the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to care when the world tried to convince you not to. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to keep his promise to Eleanor. But tonight, surrounded by the peace of a community bound together by love and the knowledge that 4 wild hearts were free and thriving in their natural home, Bill Henderson was exactly where he belonged. Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the smallest packages, and sometimes the deepest healing happens when we least expect it. Bill Henderson thought his story was over when Eleanor passed, that his capacity for love had been buried with the woman who taught him what it meant to truly care. But a tiny bobcat kitten named Rusty proved him wrong, showing that courage doesn't diminish with age, and that our hearts can always expand to hold more love, more purpose, more connection. At 74, Bill discovered that his most meaningful chapter was just beginning. Like Rusty, who risked everything daily to save his family, we seniors possess a unique kind of courage, one forged by decades of experience, tempered by loss, and strengthened by the knowledge that time is precious. We've learned that real heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up, paying attention, and choosing to care when the world tells us to look away. Eleanor's words echo for all of us. The world needs people who still care about broken things. Whether it's a neighbor in need, a cause worth fighting for, or simply refusing to let loneliness win, we have the power to choose love over fear, action over apathy. Your story isn't over. It's just waiting for the next chapter of unexpected grace. What broken thing in your community or life is calling for your attention? Have you ever discovered that in helping someone else, you actually helped heal yourself? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.